Om Bhuva, Om Bhuvaha, Om Suvaha, Om Mahaha, Om Janaha, Om Tapaha, Om Satyam. Om Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Om Apo Jyoti Raso Mritam Brahma Bhur Bhuva Suvaro. Welcome to session 1 of Terry's and my series of video teachings on the hidden path to enlightenment, messages from Mahatmas. I'm Paul Benedict, and
I'm Terry Hunt.
And we're very happy to have you join us for this series of videos on a topic that we feel is one of, if not the most important things in life. Our talks are based on this book, which we'll give lots of information on, history on, and insight into. Before we do that, though, let's just identify why we're even meeting for these and why we're sharing this information with you. There is suffering, we can't deny that. The world does have hardships, and we can make life better if we choose to. But first we have to recognize, we have to be honest about the causes of suffering, why we suffer, why some people suffer more than others. And then we have to open up our eyes wide enough to see that there is a better option for ourselves and for others. And how do we find the solutions? And we think we have one of them right here. This is a solution, right?
I think so.
This is the solution to suffering. It's the path of the Buddha. How do we release suffering? How do we find that elusive sense of happiness? And I'm going to put that in quotes because Terry and I have some opinions on the word happiness. But for this conversation, how do we find that kind of happiness that is everlasting? And that is what most people want in life, right? Right, Terry? Most people say they want happiness.
Yeah, most people I know, if you ask them, what do you want out of life? Usually happiness and love.
Happiness and love. Love is a big one. Love. Everything is love. Everything is happiness. If we press our friends on that, they might not have specific, identifiers of what that means. Is it money? Is it a big bank account? Is it the perfect spouse? Well, those things, if you really analyze them, are fleeting and they don't provide everlasting, eternal happiness or sustainable happiness. But we believe that we've found something very special that might, at its face value, might not seem like the key to happiness, but when you look at it more closely, it is. And that's why we say that it's hidden. That's why this is titled The Hidden Path to Enlightenment, because it's not readily known, but yet it's available for anybody. So we can call it Raja Yoga, we can call it yoga philosophy, we can call it the teachings of the Buddha, we can call it the teachings of the masters, the adepts.
Ancient wisdom teachings?
The ancient wisdom teachings from which most, if not all, religions and spiritual traditions come from. We would like to start off by defining some key terms that we're going to use, and some of them are Sanskrit and others are not, but let's talk about some things. The organization that Terry and I are a part of is called the Theosophical Society, and let's define theosophy first. How would you define it?
Theosophy is the most recent iteration of what we call the ancient wisdom teachings. Teachers, Socrates, Plato, many of the ancient philosophers had a philosophy that was indicative of their level of enlightenment. And it has existed forever. It is basically the source of all spiritual teachings, as you pointed out. So theosophy came through Helena Blavatsky, a photo of her right here. Helena Blavatsky was in touch with some teachers who had trained her in Tibet, and she, along with an American, Colonel Henry Olcott, formed the Theosophical Society in 1875 in New York City. So we both belong to this organization that has a group of teachings that weren't available really to the Western world until she brought them to us. In certain parts of Asia, in India especially, they have an ancient tradition, and many of these theosophical teachings are based on those same teachings. They don't always mesh 100%, but many of the people who studied Sanskrit and Oriental philosophy were already aware of some of these teachings, but not nearly as many as what she taught to people in the 1870s.
Let's point out right here that that's another reason why this is hidden, or a term that we use a lot is esoteric. HPB and Olcott and the founders of the society had every intention to disseminate these amazing secrets of the universe to everyone, to the world. And they did that in a way, but I bet you haven't heard of theosophy. Maybe some of you have, but a lot of my friends who study yoga with me say, what's theosophy? What's the Theosophical Society? And I'm like, how do you not know about this? That's another reason why it's hidden, because it didn't really catch fire or catch on like other spiritual traditions did. Buddhism became much more popular. Yoga became much more popular, mainly because of the physical aspect of yoga. But again, as we've said several times now, both Buddhism, yoga, and almost, if not all other spiritual traditions did come from one source, and we're calling that theosophy or the ancient wisdom, and that was the purpose of Blavatsky and Olcott. So that's another reason why these teachings are hidden, but what we're doing right now is we're trying to unhide them. We're going to unhide. So
right, and that was HPB Blavatsky's goal also at that time. It was actually much more well known in the late 1800s and early 1900s than it is now. As you said, it has kind of fallen out of favor as far as people's the things that they study. It is actually one of the key elements that describe New Age teachings. Many people say, oh yeah, I love everything New Age, and yet they have no idea that there was no New Age until Blavatsky came along and taught all of these things.
The term New Age was kind of coined or developed around that time.
Yes. And
in relation to these teachings. Yes.
If you look under the definition of New Age, you will see that it almost always mentions Blavatsky and theosophy.
The word theosophy, let's go just really quickly into the etymology of it. It's a compound word from two Greek words, theos and sophia. Theos is the root of what, theology? There are several other theo words.
And it's another word for God or divinity.
And Sophi or osophy, study.
The love of or study of.
That's what the word means. The love of or the study of divinity, God, the universe, the cosmos, the absolute.
Exactly. Our higher nature, our most divine, or really the source of who we are, our origin.
Oh, and that let's anecdotally linking back to our source or origin just happens to be. I love this little factoid, which seems to tie a lot of things together here. Religion, the word religion, the actual word comes from an I believe Latin or Greek word. Latin, religare, which means to link or to tie back. And so the word religion means to
unite again.
Unite again to our source. And how about the word yoga? Doesn't that mean the same thing also? The literal word of yoga means to yoke or to bind or to tie.
Join together.
Our selves, our lower selves, our transitory self with our eternal home, which is our soul or divinity. Terry, you mentioned a couple things. When we were talking about Blavatsky and when she founded the society, she was being trained, you mentioned. And you mentioned she was being trained by, I believe you used the word adepts.
Yeah, adept, yes.
What does that mean?
She, at first, she referred to them generally as the brothers or the elder brothers, meaning that they were our elder brothers in that they knew a lot more about life than the average person did. And over time, people began to get a little better understanding of exactly what she was driving at. And basically, these are the people who have acquired wisdom. Now, one of the terms we're going to be talking about a lot, or quite often, is what is it? Karma and reincarnation. So reincarnation is something that is very much tied to theosophy. You can't have theosophy without the idea of reincarnation. And theosophy doesn't require that you even believe in reincarnation, believe it or not. There's only one requirement to be a theosophist, and what is that?
The knowingness that all life is one.
Brotherhood. We are all one. We are part of the same family, and when you go back far enough, we are part of one single unit of existence. We're all united.
When I discuss this concept in many of the teacher trainings that I help facilitate and lead, it's always a little bit interesting to me that a lot of people in the yoga worlds don't know if they accept reincarnation. And you just mentioned that the adepts are people who have gained wisdom, who have gained a lot of wisdom, the most, perhaps, that could be gained on this planet. And with that fact being considered, I ask them and myself, is it possible to do that in one life? How can you learn everything this world has to teach in one life? And they don't know. I don't have an answer for that. To me, that alone right there is, to me, proof that reincarnation is real, because lifetime after lifetime, we learn more and we grow and we retain. And 80 years, 90 years seems to be just a blip on the radar, an infinitesimally small amount of time. So how could the adepts have achieved this level of wisdom in one life? I don't think that's possible.
No, and that points out something very important, and that is the difference of how the situation people are born into. Some people are born with serious deformities or with health problems or in dire circumstances, and they don't have many opportunities in life. They also have varying levels of intellect, of ability to comprehend and to figure things out. So reincarnation explains logically why that is. If we have lived other lives, if karma exists, then there is a reason for everything. there are two basic camps of people who think that life is just completely random and that it's simply the luck of the draw, and other people who believe that life is basically fair and that we have created the situations we're born into each lifetime. Each person is born into a set of circumstances based on that person's actions and thoughts and desires from previous lifetimes. Now, we can't prove reincarnation, and we can't prove any of these other concepts. I'm not going to be able to convince somebody just based on my experience. So all I can say is that this works for me, and I've studied it for 45 years, and it's the best thing I've ever found in my entire life.
I believe he's an adept.
No. Far from it.
Far from it. At this material. One thing that we can prove, though, and I know that there is something we can prove, is that it works for us.
Yes.
And our friends can prove this to themselves as well. And that really is how it's supposed to work. We're supposed to prove it to ourselves and then live it. And then we can help where we can, and other people can prove it to themselves from with our assistance. But we can never educate by force. That doesn't work. We educate by the way we live and assisting and suggesting and guiding if we can.
And by our example to friends and family. They see how we operate in life. They see what our ethics are. And maybe they decide that we have something valuable that they would like to implement in their own lives.
The word adept that we've used several times now, this is used for these teachers, these individuals who trained Blavatsky, because they are adept at life. Is that safe to say? They're adept at living life on Earth.
Exactly. No, it means someone who has achieved a high level of awareness and understanding.
And other names that we've given these individuals are several. We have several names for them. What else?
Mahatma.
Mahatma, which is also a compound word, Maha and Atma. Mm-hmm. So what is Maha?
Great.
Great or elevated or
the
above,
ultimate.
The ultimate. Yeah. And Atma, many of you know Atma if you have taken a yoga teacher training with me. It means spirit. Mm-hmm. So great spirit, Mahatma. Most of us have heard of Mahatma Gandhi. He's a great spirit, Gandhi.
He was also a big fan of theosophy.
He was. These individuals are also referred to as the masters or masters of wisdom. We prefer to refer to them as adepts or Mahatmas. There are a few other key terms we want to present. I think you used the word Chela already.
No, I
didn't
haven't.
use.
No,
but you did mention that HPB and her co-founder Henry Alcott were students of the masters, and so the next word that we want to present is Chela, which refers to that, right? Student.
Right. I'm sure most people know the term guru as a teacher. So Chela is the opposite. That's the one who is learning from the guru.
So Chela or disciple, perhaps. Disciple sounds very religious to me. I like the word Chela. And is that a Sanskrit word?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That word will come up a lot in our text that we're going to be using here. Chela-ship or studentship. And that's a key foundational concept of our entire video series that we're sharing with you is the concept of Chela-ship or discipleship.
And we should probably point out that in our future episodes, we are going to be going through this book chapter by chapter. Mm-hmm. And we're not going to present everything that's in each chapter. We're going to focus primarily on this Chela guru relationship.
I don't think we gave the title of the book.
Well, you did mention it.
Okay.
The Mahatma letters to A.P. Sinnett.
And of course, we'll discuss
in just a moment, we're going to tell you about how it came to exist.
There are three more key terms that we would like to just discuss before we go any further. The one that I want to bring up now is Raja Yoga. Now, we've given several examples of why this material is hidden or esoteric or secret and not widely known. One of the aspects of these teachings that is more known than others is yoga philosophy, specifically Raja Yoga, which refers to kingly or royal yoga. There are many yogas. There are more than I can count, schools or traditions or lineages of yoga. Raja Yoga refers to the ultimate, the pinnacle of yoga practice, which Terry and I believe will get us all the way. Will get us through samadhi to moksha,
nirvana, basically.
Exactly, moksha, nirvana, to ultimate enlightenment, freedom, the level of these wise teachers at some point far in the future, for us at least. But many of us in the Western world have been exposed to Raja Yoga at some level or another, and that's one of the more well-known aspects of this teaching. So, is there anything else you'd like? Oh, we didn't say Raja Yoga is taught mainly by Patanjali,
right,
in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. What else would you like to say about Raja Yoga?
Well, at its core, Theosophy and Raja Yoga completely mesh. They have different foci, I guess. Raja Yoga teaches more the practical application of Theosophy. Theosophy goes beyond yoga in some ways as far as teaching cosmology and anthropology, studies like that.
Raja Yoga does lay out the practical, which I think is so important.
But they mesh completely as far as agreeing with each other.
And when we say practical, we really do mean that. Even though Patanjali compiled these and he taught these probably somewhere around 200 BC, we think, they are every bit as relevant today. And one of Terry's and my other missions is to make sure that we can communicate Raja Yoga, Patanjali's teachings, in a modern day relatable way, and that's exactly what we're attempting to do here. In the Yoga Sutras, and that's why I wanted to discuss that first, in the Yoga Sutras, the practical aspects of this philosophy are two other terms, and we love these terms because they form kind of the foundation for the book that we wrote together. And these last two terms, then we'll go into more juicy things, are Viveka and Vairagya. And for anyone who's studied a yoga training with me before, you've probably had these pounded into your heads many times. But Viveka and Vairagya, two extremely important foundational, practical concepts.
Yeah, I think Taimni said that yoga, meaning Raja Yoga, begins and ends with Viveka and Vairagya.
Taimni is the author of one of our favorite commentaries on the Yoga Sutras. There are very many commentaries. Viveka and Vairagya, would you like to define those, or should I
Go
share
ahead.
with what?
For
any of my friends who are on social media, you'll probably recognize the fact that Vairagya, it was my screen name on Instagram for years and years until I recently changed it. It was Vegas Vairagi. And what I was implying is that I live in Las Vegas and I'm someone who strives to practice Vairagya, aka a Vairagi. And this is a person who is not bounded or doesn't have any binds or needs, or it's not attachment really. And of course it's a goal. If any human being does practice full Mahavairagya, we probably wouldn't even have a physical body, we wouldn't be here. So it's a practice, it's a lifelong, multi-lifelong practice to practice Vairagya. And it's to not become attached physically and emotionally to really anything, whether it's tangible or non-tangible, intangible. the idea that we don't really own anything. You may think we own our house and our car, and in some way, in some contexts we do, but do we own our spouse? Do we own our educational accomplishments? Do we own fancy clothes? You might think you do, but are they eternal? And do they support your soul? Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but these are the concepts we're going to dive into. And these teachings that we believe in, that we uphold as having truths and having keys to release suffering, say that these things do not provide everlasting happiness. Because anything that's physical, anything that's even intangible that we think we have as our own, could be taken.
That's a very good point. And one way to think of this, another way to think of this is ask yourself, the day that I die, what will I take with me? You won't take any of those things that Paul mentioned, not wealth, not your spouse, not your friends, not your house, nothing. Nothing of that will go with you on the day that you die. But there's one thing that will go with you, and what is that?
The experiences gained, the lesson learned from dealing with all of these.
That is eternal. That stays with you from lifetime to lifetime. Whatever your life experience is, whatever you have learned, that learning stays with you.
And that right there is what makes the adepts adept. Because they've gone through this process so many times. They've learned what it's like to have tremendous wealth, maybe to have lost tremendous wealth. They've learned what it's like to have zero wealth, to live on a dirt floor. They've learned what it's like to have a great relationship. They've learned what it's like to have pain. And maybe they did it all in one lifetime, but I don't think so. I don't think so. Let's see, there was... I also, this is a good time to also say that we don't ever deny the fact that we live in society. We don't live in a cave in the Himalaya mountains, right?
Not yet.
We're here, exactly. We're here in Las Vegas, Terry and I, and we live in a city, and we have cars, and I have a job, and we're not denying the fact that material things are clearly necessary. In some traditions, they're referred to as artha. They're the physical means that we need, our soul needs to live in the world. We need a car. If you're a realtor, we have to drive our clients around sometimes. If you need to search for, houses on the internet before you show the clients houses, you need a computer. We need things, right? We do. What Vairagya refers to is our relationship to those things. What is our relationship to those things? And if you think that it's a healthy relationship, it might be, but we need to ask ourselves, if these things went away as a result of anything, catastrophe, financial upheaval, mistakes, accidents, what happens inside of you? What happens to your emotion? Anything? Probably something happens to your emotion if your material things vanish. That's what Vairagya relates to. And usually there's some suffering, some or a lot of suffering, when things go away from you. That's what Vairagya refers to.
You brought up a very important point, and that is you can't become an adept until you have had numerous different types of life experience. So you can't in just one lifetime say, oh, okay, I want to become an adept in this lifetime, because it's not going to happen. Now, there's nothing to say that you didn't 3 lifetimes ago already determine that you were going to work on becoming an adept, and that may very well be possible. But it's a multi-lifetime project. And if you haven't had enough life experience, it's not even going to be in the realm of possibility. You're going to have to go back to school, so to speak, life being our school, and get some more education, some more experience, some more life lessons. And so these are people who we think have lived maybe 600-700 lifetimes. And they've got to the point where they have experienced all of these things that they, at this point, have determined are not that important. There is something more important than that. Another thing about vairagya, it's sometimes described as equanimity, just total bliss, or being completely comfortable with everything. Nothing flusters you. Nothing causes you to lose your cool, so to speak. No matter what happens in life, whether it's something good or something bad, as we call it, they don't look at it that way. It's just like, oh, really?
Can you imagine having no triggers to never become irritated?
I can't.
I know it seems sort of unrealistic, but it's not. And are we gonna? It's a work. It's a practice. It's a practice. But wouldn't it stand to reason that someone has gotten there?
Yeah.
Or
exactly.
someone's. Sometimes I bring up Jesus, and I'm going to say something controversial, but if the man Jesus did walk the earth, if he existed, I believe he was probably an adept, probably a master in a sense, maybe an adept in this context. Did he have triggers? I mean, he did have a temper at some point, did he not? But he had a good hold of himself. And I always like to look at who I believe is relatively enlightened or fully enlightened. How would they operate in any situation? Do they get annoyed? Do they get angry? Do they lose their temper? Do they flip someone off in traffic? Probably not. And I do believe that that's a worthwhile goal to have.
Well, I can tell you that even the adepts have their moments. I'll tell you. And part of what we're doing today is just giving you a little bit of insight into this book. And it teaches us a little bit about how the adepts think and how they interact with other humans. One of the teachers that Blavatsky had, and they never revealed their actual names. We don't know what their actual Indian names were, but one of them referred to himself as Maurya, and is often just referred to it with the initial M. And he was very tall, apparently 6'8" tall, which is amazing for someone from India or anywhere. But he also smoked a pipe. Believe it or not, he smoked a pipe. And he got upset one time because psychically he heard HPB refer to him as an Adonis. And he reacted to that, and he broke his pipe.
Somebody very handsome, a perfect image of a man.
Yeah, exactly.
He didn't like that.
So he reacted and broke his pipe. So yeah, they do have reactions, but they're probably very much like the Italians. They blow up and then they laugh. 2 minutes later, they're laughing.
Or like the ducks with the human mind.
Exactly.
In Eckhart Tolle's book, I think that was his first book,
right.
The Power of Now, how they flap their wings and
so.
They're done with it. They don't care, or maybe it was a New Earth.
I don't remember.
But they're done with it. The enlightened people may have a trigger, but they don't carry the resentment and they don't hold on to negativity.
And the reason for that is because they understand karma intimately, far better than we do. And so they know that holding on to any kind of anger or resentment has an enormous cost, personally. Mm-hmm. And so they do everything possible to keep their personal karma to a minimum. And that's how they got to where they are. That's why they are adepts, is because they have almost no personal karma. Mm-hmm. And that is not easy to achieve.
This will be fleshed out further, how the process of sanchita karma is reduced lifetime after lifetime in order to eventually eliminate it almost entirely to achieve this enlightenment. We're unburdened by the draw of our karmic ties anymore, and they've achieved that. We'll take a short break in just a moment. There'll be a commercial break and a word from our sponsor here in a moment. But before we do that, there's one last term that we'll just talk about for a moment, and that's viveka. So we did mention the word, and vairagya and viveka are two extremely important foundational concepts on our spiritual path. And Terry mentioned that our favorite author from Theosophy, who commentated on the Yoga Sutras, says that viveka and vairagya are, he said what? Raja Yoga begins and ends with viveka and vairagya. Viveka is the ability, in very simple terms, it means non-judgment, but clarity. Seeing the world, seeing any situation, observing it without personal biases or egoic filters. That's tough to do sometimes.
It also can be described as discernment.
Discernment, yes. And semantics play a funny game with some of these terms, because you can say, oh, well, discernment means you're making a judgment call. And I mean, in a sense, we are, but it's non-egoic, it's impersonal observation. And of course, if you call that judging, you can, but we don't call it being judgmental. We call it discerning, seeing all sides.
Well, it means, for one thing, seeing things as they are instead of how we would like them to be. And it's accepting that. It may not be the way you want it to be, but with viveka and vairagya, you take it for what it is. It's just the news. It's neither good nor bad. It's just the news, and you accept it for what it is. So nothing really upsets you. Nothing brings you down. It's being willing to just accept whatever happens. Somebody brings you what other people would consider horrible news. Someone very dear to you has died in an accident or whatever. And yeah, it would be difficult not to react to that. But if your awareness is at a certain level that is commensurate with your higher self, you see things very differently from the average person. And there is no reason to react, because in the long run, everything is exactly as it should be. And if it isn't, for a short period of time, it will equalize. It always equalizes. That's and the adepts point this out in one of their letters. There's only one law in nature, and that is equilibrium. One law in nature. Anytime anything gets out of balance, it comes back into balance.
We can also call that karma.
Exactly. It's this automatic equalizing and bringing it back to the equilibrium.
And the real world tangible benefit of seeing the world this way and accepting it through viveka is that we don't suffer. Now, I always hear, I guess I shouldn't say always, almost always hear a little bit of pushback sometimes when we discuss this. Well, if we don't react, we're cold and we don't care. If the news, like you said, was brought to us about someone very dear to us dying, if we don't react, what, you don't care. You're inhumane, you're cold. And that's not it. Compassion can exist at an extremely deep level without an emotional upheaval and the resulting suffering that it's so strange that we cause ourselves that. It's not the external circumstance. You know, that it's really strange to say that, but the circumstance happened. We see it, we associate it to things. Oh, I'm not going to have my loved one anymore. Life is going to be different. And then we feel a certain way. You can have compassion without doing that.
And again, this is one of the teachings of the Mahatmas. That is that every emotion has a cost. Whether it doesn't matter whether it's a joyous, exciting emotion or if it's an angry or depressing emotion. Every emotion has a cost.
And a lot of time the cost is a little bit of suffering, or a lot of it.
It causes suffering. Mm-hmm. That is exactly what causes suffering. And that's why at a certain level of consciousness and enlightenment, you see all of that. And so there's no temptation to react emotionally to anything. And if you do, you immediately say, okay, that's gone. Now let's get back to reality here.
Should we take a short commercial break?
Sure.
Okay. We'll be back after this short word from our sponsor. Welcome back. Welcome back to you.
Thank you.
We actually did not introduce ourselves earlier, so we'll do that now. My name is Paul Benedict, and I've lived in Las Vegas since 1991. I'm a yoga and meditation teacher here in town, but also I travel and teach yoga in many other cities nationally, and I've had the pleasure to travel with Terry a little bit internationally to teach as well. I've spent the past nearly 20 years also as a real estate broker here in Las Vegas. These days I'm focusing much more on my yoga teachings though. I also love playing the guitar and helping disseminate this information through physical yoga classes and discussion groups and lectures is my true passion. And so I couldn't be happier to be doing this here today with Terry. We met around 2006, and it might have been 2007, when Terry was teaching a class on basic theosophy. And my mind was just, I asked him if I could hang out with him and ask him more questions, and I knew he had something very, very special, and the way he was teaching these concepts just really, really touched me in a very deep way. Just the other day, I heard someone say that when they were learning spirituality, they felt like they were being reminded of it, being reminded that they were not learning something new. And I love that, because that is what happened when I first walked into Terry's house and sat down and started hearing the words karma and reincarnation and theosophy. Something just clicked and locked, and I'm like, here we go. This is it. This is it. And that was really it, because fast forward 6 years, we gave birth to this. This is a book that Terry and I co-wrote together called Ancient Wisdom for a New Age, a Practical Guide for Spiritual Growth. I know I skipped 6 years there, but in that 6 years where we were getting to know each other and starting to work with each other, we formed this really cool and special relationship. And it's not every day where you become best friends with someone that's almost twice your age, but I know I'm exaggerating a little bit. No. But it really worked.
Yeah.
I was his understudy for a few years in the Theosophical Society. We traveled around and gave classes and lectures. He'll share a little bit more about that. The first time we taught together as co-presenters was 2009, when we did a class on Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth. And we did that around the same time that Oprah Winfrey had Eckhart Tolle on her webinar for his book, A New Earth. And we believed that his teachings on the ego and on emotions and the pain body in his book, A New Earth, were so amazingly practical. They complemented theosophy in such a beautiful way that nothing in theosophy we thought did. And we said, we need to combine these two. So we did that. We created our own course in 2009 and taught theosophy with Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth. And of course, the Yoga Sutras were part of that, since Raja Yoga, as we mentioned, are a foundational component of theosophy. And after we finished teaching that course, we realized how important it was and how new that combination of different streams of schools of thought were. And so that was... those were the rivers that converged into this book here, which we self-produced, or published rather, in 2012. And since then, wow, we've been teaching a lot since then also. We've done a lot of courses and classes and lectures. I'll let Terry share more. Wow, we've done a lot, I think.
Yeah, we both loved Eckhart Tolle. And as Paul said, we found that he was teaching basically practical theosophy. His background is from Zen Buddhism, and yet obviously that too is part of the ancient wisdom teaching. So one of the things that was desperately missing in theosophy as we know it was the practical side of it, and there's a reason for that. Blavatsky wrote her main work near the end of her life was The Secret Doctrine, which is amazingly still published, still sold today in large quantities. More than 125 years later, 130 years later. And she wrote, it exists in its 2 volumes and includes an enormous amount of information about cosmology and anthropology. But she was also planning to publish 2 more volumes. The 3rd volume was supposed to be on the practical nature. And we're convinced that that would have included a lot of Raja Yoga. So we think that when you combine Raja Yoga with theosophy, you will get what she intended to publish as her 3rd volume of The Secret Doctrine. So unfortunately, she died when she was 59 years old. Suddenly, she had died from the influenza, and so she never got a chance to write that 3rd volume. In fact, she said it was almost finished, and yet the manuscript was not found after she died.
What do you think happened to that?
I think it was disappeared.
Oh, no.
Well, we also don't have the manuscript for The Secret Doctrine. It was supposedly an enormous stack of paper, all handwritten, and and no one knows where it is.
But weren't many other handwritten documents found? Just
there
not
were,
those.
and actually, one of the later presidents of the Theosophical Society published what she considered to be the 3rd volume, but it was based on other documents that she found, and it didn't at all address the idea of the practicality, the practical part of theosophy. So whether or not, there's a lot of controversy about whether or not that was accurate. So no one knows.
But yes, we do believe that the Raja Yoga teachings combined with Eckhart's, he gave the world something that we had never seen before, and that's why we thought it was so special on the ego. We've already mentioned how important Vairagya and Viveka are: non-attachment, non-reaction, non-judgment, and that's what A New Earth is all about. And then, so when Terry and I did our course, we knew we were onto something special.
Yeah. And Paul mentioned that we've taught in many different places. I think I added it up one time, and it was something like 18 different cities that we had presented courses in. And of course, for several years, we were teaching courses here in Las Vegas on a weekly basis.
You were a national speaker for the American Theosophical Society,
Right.
and was it the Inter-American Federation?
Yes.
So-
Which is a Spanish language organization. And so I got to visit almost all countries in Central America, except for Belize. I visited Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic I don't know, 5 or 6 times. Paul went with me once to Dominican Republic, and I also visited 4 countries in South America in 2010. And it was after that tour that I really felt that we needed to start writing, because we had done the course on Eckhart Tolle's book. And then it was after that tour in South America that on the way back, I just knew that the time was right. And actually, in writing the book, it was amazing. It was like everything just came together. It kind of like magic. And we think that the book turned out to be something kind of special.
We believe that, yeah, we do. What else should they know about your history, Mr. Hunt?
Nothing special.
When did you join the Theosophical Society at first?
Let's see. I first discovered it in 1975. I was helping a lady who had a metaphysical bookstore here in Las Vegas, and she had severe health problems. And I would go to her shop and it would be closed because she wasn't able to work that day. And I didn't happen to be working at the time, so I said, I'll keep it open for you on days when you are not able to, and you don't have to pay me anything. But while I was there all day, I would pick up books and just read at random. And I picked up a book called The Masters and the Path. And it was all about the Mahatmas and their pupils. And I got chills down my spine as I was reading it in the bookstore. So I bought the book, took it home, and I finished reading it by the next day. Within 24 hours, I had read the entire book.
I wish I could do that.
I was so enamored with this book. And that's what started me on my search for understanding. And so I moved to France for a year, ordered books by mail from London. And then when I got back to Las Vegas, I started a study group. And ever since then, I've been hosting classes on theosophy.
That's how we met.
That's how we met.
Amazing.
Now, let's get back to the topic.
Let's get back. We left off with defining those key terms, and then we talked a little bit about the adepts and who they are, the masters, and I want to learn more about them too. That's going to be throughout the entire course, learning about their way of teaching, their experiences, their insights into life, and that's going to be the whole series, really, which is what their letters are all about.
What I wanted to mention earlier was that every single person on earth at some point will become an adept, because nature has a plan for everyone, and it's progress. It's a series of steps, and Theosophy teaches all of those, how that happens. This series of steps where, in effect, there will come a day when we graduate from the human kingdom as we know it. And that isn't the end of our advancement. That isn't the end of our learning or our evolution of consciousness. It goes on. There is no end to it. So it's not like you reach a certain plateau and that's it. You're all done. That wouldn't make any sense at all. So after the human consciousness, there are other levels of consciousness. And the adepts are the ones who have reached that point. They've learned all that can be learned. Another thing we need to point out is that it is relatively recently that our own group of humanity has begun to attain adeptship. We make growth, we progress in groups. And the current group of souls, we might call them, in the human realm are moving through this whole level of experience in order to attain enlightenment, which leads to becoming an adept. So we are only about halfway through this process, and only recently, I will say 2,500 years ago approximately, the very first of our group of humanity attained this level of enlightenment, and that would be the Buddha. The Buddha and the Christ were very similar in their level of attainment, according to Theosophy. And so 2,500 years ago was when the first of our humanity attained adeptship. So that means we're at the very, very beginning of this stage of people. More and more, it will speed up. It will speed up and it will become easier. So the people who are attaining it right now are the trailblazers. They are the ones who are going ahead, putting forth an extreme effort in order to achieve in just a few lifetimes what most people are going to achieve over tens of thousands of years.
You said something that's worth repeating. All the souls that are associated to Earth, our group that we are a part of, are moving through a process. We're all evolving together, but not exactly at the same stages or speeds. Mm-hmm. I think that is very important to solidify in our minds and in our viewers' minds, because we are all going to get there, to this pinnacle of human consciousness. Mm-hmm. We're all going to get there. Until we get there, there is suffering.
That's right.
Why not go faster? Why not blaze a trail or 10?
Well, the answer is it's very difficult, and you have to be willing to give up a lot of things that most people simply are not willing to.
That's the part about spiritual study that not a lot of people want to acknowledge. We kind of ignore.
And again, if you want to become an adept, you have to be willing to accept things the way they are. Yeah. It's not this wonderful, exciting accomplishment to become an adept. In some ways, it's it's extremely difficult, and it's not sexy, so to speak.
You're right about that. Let's get a little specific here about our text. So this book is highly unique in the sense that we believe this contains communications from enlightened people. Now, if anyone has been around spiritual study for any amount of time, you surely have heard that there are messages from enlightened people everywhere. Channeled messages from ascended masters, or information from an enlightened being that's been given through this individual. They're everywhere. Terry and I are somewhat skeptical about most of them, but not about this. We can't prove to you that this is real.
No.
When we share the information given here, you decide. And if none of it resonates, that's perfectly fine. It resonates at a deep level with us and with most of Theosophists. And I don't know that there's any book in existence or any body of knowledge in existence that contains specific communications that are given from an enlightened person. And that's what this book is, the Mahatma Letters to an individual named A.P. Sinnett. Let's share, Terry, how this book came to be published? What are these letters? When were they written? And who's this dude, A.P. Sinnett?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that for a minute.
As Paul said, this is absolutely a unique book. It was never intended to be published. It was not a book, ever. It was not written as a book. This is a collection of actual physical letters. And guess where those letters are? They can actually be seen and read at the British Library. It used to be the British Museum, but they are at the British Library in their special collections, and you can still make arrangements to see a few of them. They have all of them, but they won't show you all of them at once. So they are still available and still can be seen. There's a website called TS Wiki, and they have photocopies of all of the letters. You can actually look online at tswiki.org.
We'll paste a link in the description of the video.
Yes, okay, we'll put that link in there. And you could actually see photographic copies of the letters.
Terry, are all the letters, is the ink on all the letters impregnated into the fibers as they are on some, or just on some?
There are different types.
Do you want to talk about that now, or should we save that?
We can mention a little bit, and we'll go into a lot more detail. Mm-hmm. Today is just to get people intrigued.
But that's intriguing to me.
It's intriguing. It is. It's exciting to me.
The ink wasn't written on the page.
On some of them.
On some of them.
Some of them were actually written. Some of them were written physically by the Mahatmas themselves. Some of them were transmitted by the post office in India and even in London, in England. Some of them were transmitted by the London post office. Some of them materialized, came out of nothing, landed on a table without having gone through anyone's hands physically. So there's a lot of different things, and we'll hear about a lot of those as we go. But let's talk about A.P. Sinnett. So after the Theosophical Society was founded by HPB and Alcott, they, after about 3 years, and in that period, she wrote another book, a 2-volume book called Isis Unveiled, which was kind of the precursor to The Secret Doctrine. They both decided that they needed to move the organization, the headquarters, to India, because that's where these teachings originally came from, India and Tibet. So in December of 1878, they began their journey to India via London. They spent 2 weeks in London and then caught the ship there, went through the Suez Canal, which had opened only shortly before that time, and made the trip to Bombay, India, which is now Mumbai. They established their headquarters there in Mumbai and eventually moved across the country to Chennai, to a place called Adyar. And the Theosophical Society, one branch, the main branch of the Theosophical Society, is still there in Chennai, and they have a beautiful property which has beachfront property, and also along the river, the Adyar River. And it's quite a beautiful place to visit if you ever get a chance to do that. So once they arrived there, within a couple of weeks, they received a letter from Alfred Percival Sinnett, an Englishman who was the editor of the largest newspaper in India. It was headquartered in Allahabad, and he was interested in the spiritualist movement, which preceded Theosophy. And so when he heard that HPB and Olcott were now living in India, he wrote him a letter and said, I would be happy to host you if you ever come to my city, Allahabad. And a few months later, they took him up on that. So they went there, stayed with him for, I believe, around three weeks. And they were telling him about the brothers. They called them the brothers at the time, the elder brothers. And he was intrigued with that. And they taught him some of the teachings that HPB had learned from them. She had spent 7 years, not all at once, but all together with them in northern India and Tibet, where she had been taught a lot of different things. And Sinnett, including one of the things that she learned, was how to produce phenomena, how to see things at a distance. Basically, these siddhis that yogis develop. If you study Raja Yoga, you will find that the advanced yogis are taught certain powers, siddhis as they're called, and among them is the ability to see at a distance, the ability to communicate at a distance, the ability to project your consciousness to a different location, no matter how far away, and to observe what's going on at that location. And HPB had learned some of these siddhis from the masters, from the adepts, but they, of course, have some that are far more advanced than what she had. So she actually produced some phenomena for many people, including A.P. Sinnett. And some of those were quite simple, like producing raps. You would ask a question about something, and it was kind of like a Ouija board, I guess, because they would recite the alphabet, and when it got to a certain letter, either a rap would occur or a little ting, like a little bell, would ring. And she could make those happen no matter where people wanted to, especially the musical notes. You could say, make it happen up in that corner up by the ceiling, and you would hear it come directly from there, or in a different room, or inside someone's head. And so Sinnett was very much intrigued with this phenomena. And he said, I want to get in touch with those people. So his wife was the first one to actually get a message from one of them. She was out with HPB on an excursion one day, and the subject came out. They were talking about the brothers, and she said, I wonder if I could get a message from one of them. And HPB said, well, I can try. And so she had a piece of pink paper that had been torn off from a page, and she held it. She went up on top of a hill, and she held it up in the air, and she turned around and she said, it's gone, and you will have your reply. And then the reply came in the form of a note that was up in a tree. Up in a tree. And they had to search. HPB saw in her mind approximately where it was, so they searched. And his wife, Patience Sinnett, found the note stuck on a twig in the tree. And the No, very simply said, I have been requested to write this note. How can I be of service?
Wow.
And that was it. That was the very first communication.
Why don't they do that still today? I know that's a long answer.
That's,
I know.
well, and we do need to address that. Why
can't
don't we have phenomena today?
Why can't I call Moya right now and say, yo,
Exactly.
I need some help.
What's up? Yeah.
The world needs you, dude.
And the answer is, and scientists and skeptics won't like the answer. The answer is this was an exception to a rule. The Brotherhood has a very strict rule that you do not perform phenomena to entertain people.
That's also in the Yoga Sutras. Patanjali,
exactly.
He warns us flat out.
No, and if you go to India and talk to any advanced yogis, they will tell you, no, I will not perform any phenomena for you. It's forbidden. Absolutely forbidden.
So they were permitted to make an exception.
So a couple of the Mahatmas, because they are a whole group, a couple of them had the idea that they wanted to introduce these concepts to the Western world.
We can edit and pause and everything.
To Europeans and Americans specifically. So they were trying to figure out the best way to do it, and they requested an exemption to this rule that they don't use phenomena. They surmised that the best way to get someone's attention was through using phenomena in order to catch their attention, and then explain that there is a system, there is a reason why they're able to do that. In many ways, it was a huge failure. And they kind of knew that ahead of time, as we will see. They knew that it was a huge risk. So they did it anyway. They took the risk, and they produced phenomena that attracted people's attention.
It's a good sales tactic.
And it did get an enormous amount of attention, and of course it attracted detractors and the people who set out to prove that it was all a fraud. And they didn't prove that it was a fraud, but they published the results of their examinations, their research, and said, well, it's obviously a fraud. And based on simply that they can't teach us how to do it, so obviously it's not real.
We're going to be talking more about the phenomenon in the text.
Yes.
The letters were mainly addressed to Sinnett, but there were also one was addressed to his wife, and then also some were written in correspondence to another dude.
A.O. Hume. So Alan O. Hume was a high official in the British Raj, the English government of India. He was basically one of like a secretary to the ruler, whatever he was called, the governor of India, or whatever his position was. He was a secretary to that individual at one point, but had retired. He was also an avid ornithologist.
What the heck is an ornithologist?
He studied birds. He was an expert on birds, and you can still find books that he wrote today. I mean, not today, but you can still find available books that he wrote about certain birds.
The majority of the letters were to Sinnett. Is that why the title is
Yes.
to Sinnett?
And he was the only one that saved them.
Okay.
A.O. Hume as we will find out, got disenchanted after about a year.
But some of those letters are published in this book.
Yes, a few, because somebody copied some of his letters, but all of his actual letters disappeared.
When was the decision made? Since it wasn't originally, they were never intended to be published. So
No.
how did the decision how was it made to put them into a book?
Sinnott was actually prohibited from publishing them without their express consent. Now, after about 1 year, he did write a book called The Occult World. And he explained how the letters came about and talked just a little bit. He talked a lot about the phenomena that got him interested in it in the first place. But he talked just briefly about some of the doctrine and the teachings that came from the brothers. And let's see, what else do I want to point out about that? So he wrote this book because they authorized him to use specific letters, and that was granted to him. But he was prohibited from publishing all of the letters. He afterwards was allowed to publish a second book, Esoteric Buddhism, and
So Sinnott wrote those two.
right.
Okay. And then this was within a year or two after the correspondence started.
Right.
When was the first edition of the Mahatma Letters published?
It was published after he died. He made arrangements in his will. His executor had he was given all of the letters, and so he didn't publish them during his lifetime, but within a year or about a year after he died, and that was in 1923 that the book came out. All of the letters were published, all of the ones that were available.
Was the chronological sequence of the first publication? No.
No.
How were they arranged in the first one?
They were arranged by topic
Okay.
because
In 19
23.
by topic. The same number of letters and the same content, just arranged differently.
Right. This book includes a few letters that are not part of the letters written to him. There are a few letters between H.P. Blavatsky and Sinnott that are included in this one. But it does include all of the Mahatma letters that were in the original edition.
And when did the chronological sequence
This
become published?
one came out, this was edited by, what's his name? Vic Hao Chin from the Philippines, and was first published in 1998.
Oh, wow. That's recent.
Yeah, that's recent.
Goodness.
And this was a tremendous help. I've been studying the Mahatma letters for 40 plus years. And the original edition was very difficult because it wasn't well organized. Somebody made an effort to publish it by subject, and there were several different books where they tried to figure out the chronology, because Sinnott didn't keep them. He didn't always write on them when he received them, and the masters almost never wrote on them when they were sent. So people, students, researchers went through and checked with each other and tried to figure out dates on them and did the best they could at assigning a date to them.
We believe they took place between a period of how many years?
4 years.
Okay.
From about late September 1880 to 1884.
So 5 years after the society was founded, and they started the same year that the headquarters was moved from New York to India in 1880.
Well, it was a year after.
A year after. So they moved it in 1879. And the letter, even the last rogue letter that came, wasn't there one that came much later? Or
Well,
is that
there
not
was
considered
one-
part of?
There was actually there were a number of pupils of the masters who received personal letters. Some of them have been published in other books called Letters from the Masters of Wisdom or something like that. But after HPB died, and the masters warned, and we'll come across that in our studies here, that once HPB was gone, there was only enough power to publish at the most 2 or 3 letters, to transmit 2 or 3. She was the conduit that made it possible, that provided the power, so to speak. And again, we'll see in another one of these that there was one time when one of the masters tried to transmit a letter and she wasn't available, and he was only able to transmit like 8 words. And he said, "You will not believe how much that cost me in energy."
If our viewers are interested in that topic, which I think is fascinating, she really is the reason that, I mean, obviously she's the reason that the Theosophical Society existed, but she is the reason that this whole movement was possible based on what you just said. She had the prana necessary
Yes.
to manifest this movement, this new wave of thinking and teaching, and she had the perfect qualities necessary for the masters to be able to do this in the first place.
Right. And one of the letters, they will state that they had been looking for 100 years to find that perfect person who could be the one to transmit this information to the outer world. And she was the one they found. And they said she was very imperfect, but she was the best that was available. No, they told her she was recognized that she wasn't the perfect conduit.
But she did an excellent job.
Yes, she did. And without her, we wouldn't have any of this. So our plan is to go through the book chapter by chapter and to extract those parts which have to do with this spiritual path that leads to adeptship. There are many, many other subjects, including history, current events that were going on in India, even in Egypt at one point, different problems that were going on with the Theosophical Society, etc., etc. But we have no intention of delving into any of those subjects other than mentioning just a tidbit here and there. We're going to extract only the essence that has to do with this spiritual path, which will be the beginning of our next session.
Mm-hmm. And with that being said, thank you for watching.
If you made it this far.
Yeah. And we're looking forward to diving into the content here with you.
So as you can see, Paul and I are both very taken by this subject, and I can tell you that it has made an enormous difference in my life, and I don't know, my life wouldn't be anywhere near as rich as it is without what I have learned.
Namaste.
Namaste. All right.